take back the responsibility. Yes, there might be some external factors that contribute, but maybe that's not the whole story. And let's take a look at what you can do to really change your outcomes, because you don't have to live with this burnout another day.
Hello, and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be a great day, my friends. We have with us the Burnout Doc. That is who is here in the house today. I'm so excited to be introducing you to her. She is a psychologist and an expert in burnout and productivity, and she guides high-achieving professionals, raise your hand if you know who I'm talking to become resilient in the face of stress and reach optimal performance. She is an author. She's a podcast host. She's an international speaker and coach. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sharon Grossman. Welcome, Sharon.
Wow. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I feel so important.
You are so important. You're doing some important work in the world. Please save us from our burnout. I'm so grateful for you for doing this important work. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm all about it.
So I'd love to know, because as we're starting this conversation, I know the word burnout is a big buzzword right now.
It is.
What exactly is burnout?
Yeah, that's a really good question that I like to start from, because we want to all be on the same page. So this just a really simple way of describing it is burnout is just chronic stress, right? And we all know what stress feels like, but there's a real difference between acute stress and chronic stress. So just so we can all wrap our heads around it, acute stress is kind of like you're stuck in traffic and you're like, I'm going to be late, and I got this appointment and so on. So you're freaking out about that. But then you kind of get over it really quickly. You forget that you were ever in traffic, right? Whereas chronic stress is something that just keeps on happening. So like, I don't know that this is the best example for business professionals, but this just popped in my head. So imagine if you're in an abusive relationship and every day you're just dealing with the same thing over and over again. Now, that sort of thing actually can happen in the workplace. There are people who work in toxic environments, or somebody who has a boss that's a micromanager and that really rubs them the wrong way. There could be so many different things. And that if you are exposed to that stressor over and over and over again, that can really start to build up your stress levels to the point where you start to feel burned out. And the other main thing that you'll notice is that when you're up against an acute stress, the kind of symptoms that you find is maybe like momentary frustration. You might get angry, right? But then it kind of goes away as you forget about it and you move on with your life. Whereas with chronic stress, you start to notice that it really makes you exhausted mentally, emotionally, like it's just taking this toll on you. And people start feeling like they're dragging and they lose their motivation and they become really cynical and resentful. And so there's this attitude change and your productivity starts to go down. And then when that happens, you're like, what's wrong with me? I used to be able to do this, and you lose your confidence. And so like there's this whole kind of snowball of things that happen and you don't know how to step out of it because the stress is still there all the time. And that's where people are really feeling like there's a sense of despair of like, how am I ever going to be able to fix this? Can I ever get out of this? Is this ever going to get better? Or do I need to really just give up, change my career, change my job, just make some drastic change in my life? So that's where a lot of the existential kind of questions pop up for people.
Absolutely. He brought up so many great things there. And one of the questions I have for you is it possible to have lived in burnout for decades? Could there be a listener right now who says, wait a minute, I don't know another way to live. This is my life, and this is how I've been living for decades.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, so what I would say is burnout is on a spectrum. And so if you are at the end of the spectrum, you're not going to live with that for decades because it's just not really possible. That's where people are. You hear about this. People are so burned out that they take their own lives. They become really suicidal. They're like, I can't live like this another day. But there's more like moderate and mild versions of burnout. And certainly people live with that for years and years. Sometimes it's because they don't know that they're burned out. And so they're not really looking for burnout recovery solutions. They're like, oh, I'll just get a better mattress because I can't sleep at night. Or, I'll get blackout shades and that'll help. Or, they're looking for these little things that they can do. Or I'll just pop a pill and I won't be so anxious, right? We're not really targeting the root of the issue often because we don't know what it is, or because we don't know what a solution is because we're not an expert in that field. So we kind of don't know what we don't know.
And there's some denial too. It's kind of like a functional alcoholic, a functional burnout, living with burnout, but functioning and making it through the day, but maybe just not doing so to our optimal ability, or even enjoying life along the way.
Yeah. And I think part of it is, part of it could be just your own belief structure. So if you don't believe that you can have a better life, if you don't believe that you deserve to have people treat you better, if you believe that your whole purpose on this planet is to take care of everybody else and not really acknowledge your own needs, there's a lot of mindset stuff that comes into burnout. And I think it's important to recognize that, because all too often what I see is people externalize the blame. They say, oh, it's my industry, it's my boss, it's my job, it's all these things that are out there. That's why I'm so resentful, right? Because if only they would do what they're supposed to do or what I want them to do, then I wouldn't feel this way. And what I'm here to say is that that's actually very disempowering.
Absolutely.
And so what I help people do is really figure out, what are you contributing to this problem? Not so that we blame you for it, but to give you back your power. Because if you're contributing to the problem, we can undo that and help you do it differently so you get different results, right? We can only control things that are in our power. But if you're in the victim mode and you're blaming the outside forces that you don't have control over, then guess what? You're going to stay stuck, and that sucks, right? So we don't want to live our lives from a place of disempowerment and like victim mentality. And certainly there are things that sometimes are circumstantial that contribute to our burnout, like the things that I mentioned, like you've got that micromanaging boss, or you've got a work culture that's really toxic. So then we focus on, well, what can you do given those circumstances, right? There's always a choice. And that's the thing that I want people to always remember is, no matter what's happening in your life, you don't have to put up with it. You don't have to always have the same outcome over and over again. You always have a choice.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I was listening to one of your podcast episodes from a podcast that I know right now you have a really cool podcast that's current and active called Decode Your Burnout, which is so cool. And you have one on your website. And by the way, I'm leaving the links to all of these for those of you who are listening and you're thinking, oh, that's really interesting, I want to check that out. You have a previous podcast called Women in Medicine Badass Radio Show. And I was, are you still there, Sharon?
I'm here.
Oh, I apologize. I clicked out because I was checking out your podcast. And I thought, oh my gosh, did I hang up on you? I apologize. In your Women in Medicine Badass Radio Show, you talk about this culture in medicine of burnout, kind of the existing structure of medicine that has become something where everybody is burnt out. So I'm imagining, as we're listening to you, as my audience is listening to you, and they're thinking, maybe I'm in burnout, but everyone around me is doing the same thing. Is this burnout really? And is it possible that in certain areas in our workplace, in our cultural workplace, that burnout has become the new normal?
So I think that wherever you go, if you ask people, and I do this with a lot of my clients, I'll say, okay, you're burned out. are there other people that you work with that aren't burned out, that are doing the same thing that you're doing? And almost always people say, yeah, there's that one lady or there's that one guy. And they seem to have it like they have it down to a science. They get out on time. They seem to be really thriving. And I'm like, so basically what we're saying is it's not just your environment, but it's how you kind of how you engage, right? So what I would encourage people to do is go out and interview those people, have lunch with those people, talk to them, hack their brain, try to figure out what are they doing differently that maybe I'm not doing and that I can start incorporating into my everyday, right? So I actually had a client recently do this. She went to lunch with this coworker who seemed to be like living the life. And she's like, tell me all the things. What are you doing? And the woman started telling her, well, I do this and I do this and da da da. And so it was like, okay, well, then she brought that into the coaching session. And we're like, well, what of that resonates for you? What can you take away? And I think at the very least, even if you don't do the same things that other people are doing, it just gives you this more open awareness of what's possible. You're like, okay, maybe I'll find my own way to hack, this career or this job. But what I do know is that it is possible. Other people are able to get out on time. Other people are able to have a life outside of work. Why am I staying 2 hours late? Why don't I have time for a proper dinner that I have to grab a sandwich because I have no time for myself? Right? Like, what's happening? What am I doing that I can do differently? And when with women in medicine in particular, I find, and not just women, actually, like also men in medicine, a lot of them struggle with electronic medical records and they can't figure out how to see patients and get their notes done at the same time. So then they have like a million notes that they have to catch up on, and it takes hours and hours, and they're already like out of that mindset because they've seen so many people. They have to now rack their brain, like, what do we talk about and what do we do and what do I write? And I always say it's best to do it when it's fresh in your mind and figure out how to get it done as close to that appointment as possible, which makes sense, right? But people just haven't figured out how to do that. And so they start to think about, well, how can I do it faster? Maybe I create a template. Maybe I have some sort of video that I show my patients that reduces the time that I have to spend with them, where I'm repeating the same information for patient after patient after patient. Maybe there's some like protocol that I can just send them some sort of video that they watch. And that happened to me actually as a patient, which I thought was brilliant. Years and years ago, I went to have LASIK. And I came into this doctor's office and they put me in this little living room with a couch and a television. And I was like, ooh, fancy. And then they put on this little 3-minute video that talks about LASIK. And I was just like, okay, I got the gist. And then from there, they just take you into schedule your session. And do you have any questions? And that was it. And I'm like, that's brilliant, right? So if we can start to think in creative ways about how to get our work done faster, then maybe we don't have to burn out. We don't have to be resentful about how much time we have facing customers or patients, or how long things take, or why we're not able to get our stuff done in the time that we have. Like, I think there's always a solution, and we just have to really think about it in a creative way, and we'll get there.
I love that, because instead of taking it all on yourself all the time, asking for help, using resources, using technology to your benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much out there right now with technology that people don't even know about, right? And I think, a great way to kind of figure this out is ask yourself, well, what would magically make this so much better? And imagine, like, you didn't know that they have this technology. You say, well, it would be amazing if I didn't have to repeat myself all the time. And you're like, well, is there something like that? And then you just like Google it and then you find it.
It's so interesting, because I think sometimes the challenge is reaching that zone of creativity and ingenuity when you're in burnout. When you're in burnout, by definition, you're in fight or flight. You're not functioning from that higher intellectual, creative mind that you have normally access to. So, how do you support clients who come to you and say, okay, I'm in burnout, and here's the million reasons why I can't change my day. The culture is set up that way. I'm in a work environment where I don't have options. I mean, we can make excuses for ourselves all the time. And I
For
feel
sure.
like that's where we live when we're in burnout. So, how do you take that first step to gain empowerment over your own situation?
Well, the very first thing I do is I want to educate people on what it actually takes for them to get to the other side.
Hmm.
And so I say, it really takes three big steps for you. The first step is to really, what you need to do is get in control of your mind, because that's where all of the negativity comes in. That's where you're losing a lot of your energy because you're engaging in things that rob you of energy, that are energy drains. Like maybe you're setting unrealistic expectations for yourself,
Hmm.
or you're seeking approval from other people, or you're doing things that maybe if you did it differently, you would feel more energized. You would have a more positive mindset, right? So that's really the first thing, is you got to get in control of your mind. The second thing is you want to optimize the way that you work.
Hmm.
And so that means, how do you engage in a way with the work that you have that allows you to get into a state of flow and to work on the things where you have your strengths, and to maybe get some things off of your plate, right? How do you make sure that the effort that you're putting into things has a balanced reward system in it for you, right? That you feel that it's worth your while, right? Are there any sort of limiting beliefs that we need to remove that allow you to be more present, less stuck, just feel better? And ultimately, the third step is to change your relationship with yourself. And so what I see a lot with people is that they really have their productivity tied with their self-worth, which leads them to constantly need to prove something. And that's why they're burned out, because they're always like onto the next thing, and they can never, quote unquote, arrive, right? There's always more to do. There's always more to prove. And actually, I recently had this conversation with some of my clients. We're always complaining that there's not enough time for us and the things that we want to do, right? Like, I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to meditate. I can't take a vacation, right? There's too much work and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, let me ask you this. If you had more time, what would you do with that time? And some people actually like panic at the thought of having free time, because they're coming from that mindset of, I should be doing something all the time. What do you mean? Like, I don't even know. I would have to fill up all of my time with more stuff to do, because just not doing something feels like I'm doing it wrong. So a lot of this is mindset in our existing beliefs. And so we're kind of setting ourselves up a lot of times without realizing it, because so much of this is subconscious. So what I help people do is kind of separate these things out and recognize that, you know what? You're already an amazing person simply because of who you are. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. You can do amazing things, but not from a place of compulsion, not from a place of, I have to do this, but more from a place of, I want to do it. It fills me with joy. It gives me a sense of purpose. I find meaning in this work. I want to change the world. I want to help other people, right? From that place.
If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know.
And it makes such a difference when you shift these little things inside of you. And so when I say There are things that are in your control. This is exactly what I mean, right? It's just the way that you show up, the way that you engage makes a huge difference in how you feel and what you get back, right? Because if we're constantly in this place of, I have to do more, I have to do more for other people, I have to do more so that I get acknowledged, I have to do more so that I have more banners and titles and things behind my name, then it just feels like we are in this endless hamster wheel and it never ends and we're exhausted. And so I think it's important to really hold on to these ideas and think about, like, what am I doing that keeps me stuck, that leads to my burnout? Like, take back the responsibility. Yes, there might be some external factors that contribute, but maybe that's not the whole story. And let's take a look at what you can do to really change your outcomes, because you don't have to live with this burnout another day.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's great. Tell me your story with burnout. Like, how did you come to doing this work? Did you have an experience in your own life of burnout?
So this is a question I get a lot. And I think that what I find funny in it is that literally every other person in the burnout industry that I've ever met has a burnout story that led them to saying, okay, I've burned out, I've recovered, and so now I want to help other people with the same thing. And I'm kind of the exception to the rule. And so my story is a little different. My story is not about burnout recovery. My story is about burnout prevention. And so the way mine unfolded is, when I was in grad school, I went to a conference, a psychology conference. And one of the workshops that I attended was this guy who was in private practice as a psychologist. And he shared how, private practice can be great for a lot of things, but there's this huge problem with burnout. And so I was like, okay, red flag, don't ever go into private practice. You don't want to burn out. You don't want to deal with that, right? And then I was like, yeah, and it's kind of lonely. You're not working with other people. You're there all day by yourself, just seeing like patient after patient. It's like a factory. Like, I don't want to do that. So I finish my studies. I go into a nonprofit and I'm doing this like work in this great program. And it's got this great mission. We're helping young people with early psychosis kind of figure out how to get in control of their brains and their minds and turn the table so that they don't grow into these adults with chronic condition. So I was like, this is great. And it had a lot of didactics, which I love. So I was like, there's all these great benefits. But after a few years, I reached this ceiling, and the only place up from there, because I'd already gotten to a point where I was a supervisor and I was, the sit-in every time we had like turnover with managers. So they're like, can you be interim and things like that. So I was like, all right. But I got to a point where it was like the only place up from there was management. And I was like, I did not go to school for 10 years so that I could sit in meetings all day and talk about whatever it is they talk about, budgets. You know what I mean? Like, that's so not sexy. Like, I am not interested. I want to work with people. Like, that's my passion, right? So then I start looking for all these other job opportunities, and I find out one by one that they're not a fit. And what's driving my decision all the time is my value of lifestyle, because that's always been really important to me. So I'm like, okay, this one, you have to work nights and weekends. No, this one, I'm going to have to sit in traffic for like an hour every day. No, you know what I mean? Like, I'm taking this one, I have to work with homeless people. And I'm like, it's just not a fit, or I have to work with children. I'm like, I want to work with high functioning adults, like, right? Like, that's my jam. So I'm like, I just didn't find myself anywhere. And then I'm like, well, I guess if it doesn't exist, I have to create it, which meant going to private practice. So then I was like, remembering that talk in the back of my mind. And I was like, but if I'm going to do this, I got to do this smart. because I don't want to be a statistic, right? So I found an office space that was near my gym, and I would create my schedule, which is a perk you have as an entrepreneur. You get to decide your hours. And I decided that in the middle of the day, I would take this extended lunch break and I would go to the gym and I would work out so that I didn't have the problem of now I finished my day and there's no time to exercise, right? Like I was trying to have everything kind of baked in. And so that worked really well.
Yeah.
And as I started working with people, I started to notice that there's this pattern that people were just like really unhappy with their jobs. And I started to research some of that. And I decided I was going to write this book. So I was really getting heavy into the burnout literature. What are other people writing about and what's out there? And this was pre-COVID. And there wasn't as much out there as there is now. Now there's so much out there on burnout. But back then, it wasn't as much. It was more about corporate burnout and like what organizations can do to help. And I'm like, that's great. But if I'm the employee, I can sit around and wait for maybe my organization is going to implement some of these things, but probably not. I got to think about what I can do to help myself, right? So that's where I decided I'm going to write this book. And as I started doing all this research and thinking about how to apply the things that I teach my clients to like this specific topic of burnout, I started listening with a different ear to my clients. And I realized that a lot of them were burned out, but they didn't know it. Right. So as I started to describe like what's going on for them, I would say, it sounds like you're burned out. And then they had this light bulb moment where they'd be like, oh, that's what it is, right? And then from there, we can have a conversation. Okay, given the fact that this is the diagnosis, right? What do we do from here? And so my whole kind of passion became about educating people on burnout so that they know what to look out for and that they can find customized solutions to their problem, because burnout happens for so many different reasons. It's not a one size fits all. So it's not like, oh, if you're burned out, just do this, which is kind of how most of the media out there talks about burnout. They're like, oh, just go on vacation.
Yeah. Or buy this product or buy this tool.
That's it. And I'm like, and it really isn't very helpful because number one, if you just go on vacation and you come back and you do things in the exact same way that you did before, you're going to burn out another time.
Yes.
So I talk to people who've burned out like 2, 3, 4 different times. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that's because that solution doesn't work, right? We have to target the root of the issue. We got to make some real changes and not just do these really superficial, like I'm just going to take some time off and recharge my batteries, which is great, but that's not the end all. Yeah. Right? It's not enough. So
it's not sustainable.
It's not. So I've made that my kind of life work right now, my mission.
And you offer actually something that you offer to my audience, which I'm so excited about, is a little idea of how to evaluate your own burnout. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's what you're talking about, is having the awareness, number one, that you're in burnout. So how do you even know? And then what do you do about it?
Yeah, exactly. So obviously, a lot of times people have questions about this. And so I created a burnout checklist. That's a free download. So you could just go to my website and download it. It's drsharongrossman.com/burnout checklist. And it tells you exactly like what are the main symptoms of burnout that you might be experiencing, what to do based on what you're finding. And then I also follow up with you afterwards with some other resources and things that you can do so that you're not left wondering. You know, because I think a lot of times people are like, I don't know, is this burnout? Is it something else? Like I had a woman contact me yesterday and she's like, well, I have this autoimmune disease and I'm really exhausted. And I know exhaustion is kind of a burnout symptom as well. So is this burnout or is this my autoimmune disease, right? So sometimes people are just not sure and we have to dissect it. And so for people who, you know, do the checklist and then they're like, I really want to talk about this further, I also offer a free consultation so people can always get on a call with me and figure out together like what is actually going on and what would be the most helpful thing for me given what's happening in my life.
That's awesome. And especially in that example you were using, it's so important to recognize burnout if you're trying to manage a life with an autoimmune disease as well, because
Yeah.
it's feeding it and it's giving it more power over you if you're not paying attention to the burnout aspect.
Yeah, and I think that there's something to be said about this whole relationship between burnout and autoimmune because I keep seeing that pop up again and again. And here's what I want people to hear is that a lot of times, if not all the time, autoimmune is a result of stress.
Yes.
And so is burnout, right? So, I mean, believe it or not, like if we manage your stress better, if we get you to a point where you're thinking differently, you're doing things differently, and you're not filled with stress all the time, it can affect not just your burnout, it can actually change your health outcomes as well.
Mm, really cool. Really cool. And what you're saying is you have it within you. You don't have to be a victim of your circumstances. You actually have the power within you to make real change in your life.
100%. I totally
Yeah.
believe that. And I've seen it.
Yeah. Yeah. Really cool. Really cool. Thank you. And thank you for this offer for that free download. And I will definitely make sure we leave that link in our show notes and also the link to your book, The 7E Solution to Burnout. You also have coming up a free 1 hour training on LinkedIn on September 14th. Tell us a little bit about that, and we'll make sure that link goes in the show notes as well.
Yeah, so if you're watching this, I do a monthly training on burnout where I really dive deep into the 3 steps that I mentioned today,
Yeah.
that I think are really crucial for people to make a significant difference in their lives. Like, what does it really take? And so, if you want to go more deep dive into what we started talking about today, I'm going to be doing that as an hour-long training. And that's going to be on September 14th. But if you are listening to this and maybe it's after that date, then you could just go to my LinkedIn page. So I'm just like Sharon Grossman on LinkedIn. And, I'll always post the latest link for that month's training. So I hope to see you there.
Cool. Oh, thank you so much for everything you do. Before we leave, I do have to ask you the one precious question I ask of all my guests, and it's actually super related to what we're talking about today. And I'm always fascinated to know from incredible men and women like you who have learned so much about how to manage and navigate this beautiful thing we call life and indulge in our passions of work and productivity and success. What does happiness mean to you? What is your definition of happiness?
So I kind of equate happiness with gratitude.
Mm,
And I say it's not what you have that makes you happy. It's appreciating what you have that makes you happy.
mm,
Because so many of us have a lot and we're still miserable. And I think there are people in the world, and we know this for a fact, right, that have so little and they're just so joyful.
mm,
And the difference between the two is that they're just grateful for what they have. It's just an attitude, really. It's an attitude of gratitude. And I think, gratitude is another one of those things that you see thrown around a lot in social media. But I will say that there is science behind this. And we do know that when you are grateful for what you have, not only are you happier, but you end up attracting more of that into your sphere. And I really believe that. So I encourage everybody to take it seriously. Like it's there, it's out there for a reason, right? People are talking about it because it works. So think about all the things that you have to be grateful for. And I do this even with my clients who are burned out. And they find that it really makes a difference for them because when you're burned out, you're focused on everything that's wrong.
mm.
You're focused on all the
Absolutely.
things that you don't have control over, that suck, that that you're angry about, that you're resentful about. And when you're grateful, even from that burned out place, you can say, well, what is going right? What do I like about my job? And when you start to focus on that, you just feel lighter. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, you know what? Nothing's actually changed. Like you're still in the same job, like everything's the same, but you're shifting the focus of your mind. And that alone can make you feel a lot better. And it's not that we're ignoring the problem. We're still going to work on the problem, but why not feel good while you're working on the problem rather than stay stuck in the bitterness?
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining us on this episode today. I really encourage you to check Sharon out. She has some amazing content on her website. I did a little deep dive there myself and learned so much. So check her out. Check out the show notes. And if this episode has spoken to you, or if you know somebody who you think could learn a little bit about burnout, please share this with them and empower their day. And remember, when you feel good, that's when you can do good. Goodbye.